Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about helping students use constructive criticism. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was interesting because I have just completed round 2 of COVID in our house.
Round 2?
I saw a really funny quote this week, and it was like, what will you do with your one wild and glorious month in between COVID surges? I was like, yes, that's actually becoming all too accurate and true. So yes, we got, I don't understand anything about testing for COVID because the first round of COVID, me and my daughter tested positive on PCR, but like never tested positive on the home kit. Mm-hmm. And this time, so I was like, I guess biologically we just don't make whatever the thing is, or we didn't whatever it was. But my daughter got a big giant line on her antigen test. And so, yes, and we all got it. And she got quite sick actually, which I was surprised because it was her second time and she's been vaccinated in between. But in terms of doomsaying for America, like literally the entirety of Ireland has COVID right now. Like absolutely everybody.
Oh my goodness.
Just even the Taoiseach, like the head of the country, went to America for St. Patrick's Day and got COVID and couldn't meet the president. And
oh my goodness.
Just, yeah, so whatever version, I heard someone calling it Deltacron, but I guess it's some subversion of Omicron, but it's absolutely just everywhere.
Just everywhere.
So, yeah, and like new symptom that I'm hearing about too is mouth blisters. A whole bunch of people have had that. So that's just opening with a cheerful note. Just wait for your mouth. Your mouth blisters are on their way across the Atlantic. So yeah, sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I'm just glad that you guys are coming out of this the second time you had to go through it. You're on the other side of it now.
Much, and I definitely was really, really tired and had a sore throat, but nothing like the first time. But the weirdest thing was I found it intolerable to be home for that entire week. Whereas like the last time it was 4 weeks between isolating before, and I think it's just having a slight like scent of freedom in the air makes it like even more difficult suddenly to. Yeah, but
that makes sense.
I think it was infinitely better than the first time we had it for sure. And
that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah,
gosh.
And I think, but it's weird too. I think they should really, statistically, because I am teaching teachers, and I've been noticing a serious uptick in teachers emailing to say they couldn't attend certain things because they have COVID, and then it turned into this. I think the teachers are the canaries in the coal mine. I think they should.
Oh, interesting.
That's where they should be.
Sense.
Totally. Yeah. So anyway, how was your week?
My week was good. My students are kind of switching from... So in instrumental analysis, the class I'm teaching right now, they go through a whole bunch of experiments in one category of instrumental analysis, then they do a bunch of experiments in another. So it's like a bunch of electrochemistry experiments, a bunch of spectroscopy experiments, yada, yada. And then anyway, after that, we're switching into final projects, and we're switching kind of right now. And I found it really interesting. I just feel less comfortable with the open nature of the final projects. So I have 5 different groups, and they're doing different experiments with different instruments. And what we're going to do is we're going to go on our university's little research vessel and collect samples from the local bay, and then they're going to all analyze them for different things, and then it'll be really cool. But yeah, I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with them all doing different projects that they could take in all these different directions, and I'm like, what are the students going to learn? This is less clear to me about what my learning outcomes are, and less clear to me what problems they're going to run into, and me being ready to solve them. And I've just found it interesting to realize that I'm just less experienced with that and less comfortable with that format. Even though I think it's valuable, I am nervous about it.
See, man, this is why you're awesome. Because I feel that way, and that's why I don't do it. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, no, I don't like it. It's too uncomfortable. And even when you're describing, they can all go in different directions, and I'm like, no, that sounds terrifying. So
I know.
Yeah, but it's great. I mean, it's great that you're doing it, and like, I mean, obviously all these things, right? Like in
Mm-hmm.
10 years time, you'll be just like you'll have it such a clear idea of what students
Totally.
usually do and it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's weird.
And I think part of what I need to realize, and I'm reminding myself, is that it's one of the cool things is that they can go in all these different directions. And in fact, if it doesn't work as perfectly, that's okay. That's still part of the learning experience.
yeah.
And so therefore, I don't have to worry about being equipped to solve all the problems that they might run into. In fact, them trying to solve whatever problems they run into will actually be part of the learning experience. So I maybe just need to be less hands-on and feel comfortable with that, you know?
Yeah. Totally.
So I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm just having a vision of you like sitting back in your chair with your arms behind your head being like, you got this, and just putting it back on them. So yeah, that would be perfect.
Cool.
Cool. So you have a quote for us today.
I do. Did you ever watch The Magic School Bus?
Yes, the original.
I think so. Yeah, the animated one from I don't know, my childhood.
I didn't as a child, but have with my children.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was wondering if the timeline would have worked out. So anyway, I was thinking kind of in constructive criticism, but she has a quote that she says all the time. She says, "Take chances, make mistakes, get messy."
Oh,
And I just thought that
love
was a
that.
nice reminder of
I love Mrs. Frizzle.
Me too. Isn't she great?
She
And
is
then
great.
I just happened, when I was looking up the particulars of that, I happened to run into another quote by her, so I just wanted to double quote Miss Frizzle. This one is, "If you don't look, you'll never see. And what you don't see can be very hard to find."
Oh, I love it.
I thought that was quite wise and fun phrasing. So anyway, I like Miss Frizzle.
Genius. I love it.
Yeah. All right, so helping students use constructive criticism. So I started thinking about this because we've just started getting back into in-person seminars where our senior students give a full seminar to the department talking about a paper of their choice. And so the students had been doing seminars, but they had been doing, and that includes practice seminars where they practice with their classmates before their official seminar and get feedback from their classmates. So that had all been happening during COVID, but I was less aware of it because it was all happening virtually and I wasn't involved with the class. But now my office is right next to the practice seminar room and the seminar room. So anyway, I see all these people giving practice talks.
Ooh.
And I walk by as they're about to do it and just chatting with them about the fear of getting the constructive criticism has made me think about, well, how can we help students best use the constructive criticism, you know? And so anyway, I just kind of wanted to talk about that.
Beautiful. And actually, I think I'm really glad that you brought this up as a topic because you're the only person who's ever really talked to me about constructive criticism. Because I think I totally have sent you stuff and been like, look what all these mean people said. And that's usually the extent of my relationship with criticism is just, is it mean or not? And then I don't use it for anything.
Totally.
And you were really good at being like, yes, that was very mean and it's very sad that happened to you, that you had to read it. But also, and I was like, oh, there's an also apart from I didn't. So, yeah.
And that's, I think, the thing, is it's so, I mean, that's my initial reaction too, and I would maybe guess most people's initial reaction to hearing constructive feedback, you know? So anyway, let's see. I'll start with what's working for me.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on creative writing groups, reading creative writing books, or books on creative writing, and especially on this online community called Scribophile. And so I got a lot of, writing creative stuff necessitates feedback because before you actually publish it, you need to have some people read it and get some feedback and incorporate the feedback. That's very common practice in creative writing. So I guess a lot of people have talked about it there. So kind of where I've gotten my most explicit thoughts on how to take constructive criticism has been from creative writing. So I just wanted to throw out some of the things that I feel like I've gotten from that side. So if somebody reads your work and offers feedback, the answer is just thank you. Thank you for taking the time to look at what I wrote and give me some feedback on it. So that's the answer. And then separately, and later if needed to let the emotional response of the feedback subside, separately, you assess whether you agree with the feedback. And it's perfectly okay if you don't agree. That's fine. You're just trying to... That might happen a lot because people didn't understand what you were going for or whatever. So it's perfectly okay not to agree, but just a note to be sure that you genuinely don't agree, and it's not just that initial reaction of, what the heck, I didn't really want feedback, you know? And I remember reading something about if it's a good sign that you're not really thinking about it fully is if you don't agree with any of the suggestions, you know? There's probably some in there that are useful. So that'd be a sign that you're not, like, considering them properly. So then, another tip, so these are all, I just kind of wanted to list, I feel like these are tips that have been helpful for me thinking about constructive criticism. So separately, you assess if you agree, and then sometimes there's examples where it's like, the person who gave you the feedback identified a problem but suggested the wrong solution. And so you're like, no, that's the wrong solution, but thank you for pointing out that problem. Now I can figure out the right solution. And if they didn't understand something and went off totally in the wrong direction, the takeaway is, oh, I wasn't clear about the thing, you know? So I don't know. All those things have just been helpful, like explicit little pieces of advice for how to take constructive criticism that I found really helpful, and what I'm working on is trying to help pass them on to my students.
That's brilliant. I love it. And I think it's so interesting just what you're saying about the creative fields and how used to they are, like, of this kind of feedback process, and how unbelievably not used to it we are in science. And, like, I just feel like it's genuinely only through, like, talking to people who are in those kind of fields. Like, I really think I did believe that you should just, like, your first draft should be right. Mm-hmm, you know what I mean? And just even the concept that, like, no, like, that's, you just throw down whatever, sure. And then editing and, like, all of that stuff, like, that was just not in my, like, mind that was part of the process.
That's a really good point. Go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah, but I think these are so beautiful, and I think you've totally used them on me too, like when I'm, like, having a tantrum about something, and it's so, because one of the things I strongly feel is the sense of injustice of, like, but that's not what I meant, and, like, but then you're totally right, like, if that's not what you meant and that's what they took from it, even if they totally ran off, you know what I mean, like, it's still, then obviously it's not clear enough, right? Because if whatever, one of the three reviewers totally got the wrong end of the stick, that's a pretty big odds that you didn't explain it right. So, yeah, that's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and, you know, I think this applies too. And, you know, in creative writing, you'd want to get somebody in your same genre to, somebody who understands what you're trying to do would be the best person to give you feedback. But still, it should be communicated through the writing. So, yeah, you know, so I think in science we do this a lot. We have all the peer-reviewed articles, we have all the feedback on grant proposals, and in fact, all the assignments that you get feedback on in any discipline is another type of constructive criticism. So I feel like it's around, but yeah, I never really hear people talk about it explicitly as much in science as I did in creative writing. So I think it's helpful to bring those things around. Anyway, what's working for you with constructive?
All of this is so interesting because it's like, okay, so I'm just going off on a bit of a thing, and I think there is still, I mean, I'm sure there's some people in creative writing who are like, no, and Joe just sat down and, like, on his typewriter hammered out, like, this Nobel Prize winning whatever, but I feel like there's, you know, in terms of fixed mindset and growth mindset, I wonder how much those things tie together. Do you know what I mean? Just the idea of, like, that it's an iterative process. But do you know what's interesting for me then? I've noticed I have a lot more success in giving constructive criticism and for students just having a much more open and flowing dialogue whenever it's about something like a personal statement or like a grad school application. For some reason, that process is not stressful for me or necessarily the student. Do you know what I mean?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to something like giving a talk, like a seminar, or if they're writing like a paper or a report. Like, for some reason, that feels more fraught for both. Probably from me. Like, if I'm not comfortable giving the feedback, then they're probably not comfortable receiving it. Mm-hmm. But for some reason... But I kind of wonder, is that because an application feels like, okay, it's not creative writing, but it's more like in that wheelhouse of like writing something like a communication piece rather than whatever, a scientific seminar or something. Is that why, like, that's just accepted to be more part of it? I don't know. But
Interesting. And you were saying something about having it be more of a dialogue. Do you mean the piece itself is more of a dialogue, or do you mean your interaction with the students is more
my interaction
of a
with students, like giving feedback, and I feel a lot more comfortable, like, I think in a way too, because it's like real world. Do you know what I mean? And it feels more urgent to be like, okay, but really you can't send this in because it has to be, you know what I mean? And so
Okay,
you really have to, you know, it's like important that we do this and talk this through. And maybe I think maybe some of my issue around more academic type things is that it is a little arbitrary. Like it is, like I'm grading the seminar or whatever, you know what I mean? So it feels a bit more, yeah.
That does make sense. So you're like, this is what you're submitting to get this job or this internship or whatever, and you really want to help them get this job, and so you feel more comfortable saying, "Oh my goodness, you really need to fix these things." Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah.
Totally. And
interesting.
I think the thing that's worked for me, and I don't have any, like, a huge amount of experience with reading up about this, and it's something I'd like to explore more, but the compliment sandwich, you know.
Oh, I
so
love
like,
the compliment sandwich. It's my favorite thing. Sorry, explain the compliment sandwich.
Well, it's just like you open with something that the person did really well, like a compliment, and then if you have something that you want to critique or make a suggestion about, and then you follow up at the end with another compliment or something. That's great.
That's so helpful at helping the constructive criticism be constructive, be construed as constructive, I feel like.
Totally.
Be received as something they can actually work on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've had people doing it and I'm like, oh, look, they're doing the compliment sandwich, and it still feels better, even though I know
even if you know
what's happening. Yeah, you're still like, oh, I do actually feel better. And I think
I agree.
For giving students feedback as well is giving them an action. So just saying this is the worst thing I've ever read is completely...
Yes.
Yeah. You know, so I think making sure that it's like an actionable thing is... Yeah. Even if like... You know, you have given me feedback before where it's just like, I'm not quite sure what this is saying. Or like, you know what I mean? Like... Or like this sentence, blah, blah, blah. Like it's a very focused and particular thing. It's not like, just wasn't feeling it. Or, you know. Yeah. So I think that's helpful.
I like that. I've thought about that before with, in the specific context of when a student is having trouble with some aspect of the writing where I feel like maybe the advice is try reading this aloud, you know, or something actionable that I think would help solve the coming up with some suggestion.
Yeah.
Of something they could do rather than to help, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Pointed in the direction of productivity.
For sure. And then it's like, also, you know, so with kids, there's a real thing about like, not, like if you are having an issue with something, you really describe the behavior rather than you are lazy or something awful like that. Like instead it's like those socks need to be picked up or, you know, whatever it is, so that it's like an action and you're not like attacking someone's integral whatever. And it's just like this one thing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So what are you working on?
Well, I'm working on delivering effectively this information about some tools for taking constructive criticism and using it effective, you know, how I'm trying to deliver this information to the students. And the way I think about all this information is how to use the constructive criticism. Because the whole point of having these drafts and practice seminars and all that is to get the constructive criticism and improve. And so, but it completely doesn't work unless we're able to effectively use the constructive criticism. So I don't have an official way of like presenting Claire's thoughts on how to effectively use constructive criticism to my students. When it comes up, I do share, like, I ran into a student about to give his practice seminar, and he was talking, he brought up the conversation topic of being worried about what the students were going to say. And so I just said a few of those things, like, well, whatever they say, the answer's thank you, because they were providing you with some thoughts, and then later you can go sort through and figure out how you want to deal with it, and maybe they make a suggestion that's obviously the wrong suggestion, but try to figure out why they made that suggestion, what problem they might have identified that they were trying to solve, and then you can solve it the right way. So I have this like unofficial as it comes up way of sharing this, but I wonder if it'd be cool to formalize it somehow. And I was thinking, like, it's kind of tricky because in my classes, I'm usually the one giving the feedback, so I don't want to be like, you should always just say thank you. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But maybe if there was some peer feedback assignment, or just the concept that they're trying to use this information. And I guess it kind of comes up, like right now I have, for their final projects that I mentioned earlier, they're doing this big report, and they're handing in pieces of it as drafts throughout, before they have to hand in the final version. And I have had a few students be really like, oh my goodness, I'm not ready to write this yet. I don't have all the information. This is really early. It's not going to be my best work. And I'm trying to explain, and maybe this is kind of similar, like the point is for you to start and figure out what pieces you don't have so that you can fill them in by the final version. So don't worry that it's not going to be your perfect version. That's a little bit different because, that's a little different because there's all these reasons for why you want to start and have a draft and continue. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm having this like complete meltdown epiphany over here about, just warning you that's coming. But no, I feel like all of this ties into the whole process of students being in our classes and us evaluating them. Okay. Do you know what I mean? Because grades, in a way, are constructive feedback. I'm doing air quotes. But you know what I mean? And like, I come at things from such an immature place where I'm like being evaluated, and like what the person says is now the facts of the universe. And do you know what I mean? And first of all, I love the thank you. And I hear what you're saying about you don't want people to come up and like bow to you and say thank you. But I think the thank you though, to me, feels like even in your own head is important, right? So like if I get grumpy reviewers for some grant, hypothetically, which totally happened last summer, but in my head, if you can just say thank you for that, like thanks. Even that bit feels like a really important step. Like I'm all about the steps you're providing. Like I think that's super important. But yeah, having the internal thank you like for that. But I feel like it's the same thing with grades, that students don't receive those as an invitation to like look at that and see, okay, what do I need to change next time? Or what is this telling me about what my understanding of all of this stuff? And so I'm having, like, I totally am so into this process.
Cool.
So like the thank you, because I think the thank you is a really important part of it. You know what I mean? And to sort of, even if you're gritting your teeth and you're like, right, but then the evaluating whether you agree with it or not is so beautiful because again, sometimes I'm like, oh, I guess that's just it then. And it might not be it. And maybe it's not, I don't, accept that. So I love these stages. I think that's super beautiful. And then I love that. And I think though, even what you're saying about the student, like it is a little different, but getting comfortable with handing in non-perfect stuff is kind of part of the whole thing, right? Because then you're really open to receiving constructive criticism.
Sure. And we do that all the time, like you maybe send your grant proposal to the pre-award specialist before it's done to get some feedback on, or a colleague or whatever. Or you give a practice talk before you go present somewhere and you just want, we had practice dissertation defense talks when I was in grad school, and that was really helpful. I remember in mine, well, chapters 1 and 3 were pretty good, but nobody understood chapter 2. I guess I need to rework chapter 2, That was my takeaway from the practice talk, and that's very helpful. So it's not uncommon. There's like different stages of this constructive criticism, and some of them are on the draft, and some of them are pretty close to done, but you still want, it's still a draft. You're still trying to revise it. So it's, anyway, I agree completely.
Yeah, so I think for me, I don't know, I'm kind of, because I think we talked about this a bit before, like I'm not down with the constructive, like I don't have a good plan with the students, but this is really selling it to me. Cool. Like to have, just normalize this so much and normalize the whole process of, because I know too, like I knew factually that it was good to do a practice talk, and I still didn't want to do one because
Mm-hmm.
you still have the fantasy that somehow you might just bust out the perfect talk the first time you
Mm-hmm.
give it. And yeah, I think all of this normalizing
Mm-hmm.
that, like, and feedback it is generous. Do you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Exactly. And that, I think you're right. The thank you is very helpful in your own mind to be like, wait, this is a reminder that this person is doing me a favor by giving me some constructive criticism. That's
And
interesting.
it doesn't mean they, like, it's true. Like, that's so helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it is
You're
if you're giving
getting
the feedback to your students because you're the person, but, like, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
yeah.
Well, it's that person's impression of your work, you know? And I think there are times, like if somebody wrote a whole bunch of equations, but I couldn't really follow what they were doing, well, maybe I didn't understand what they were doing. Maybe they did have a better understanding than they conveyed to me, but now they know that they did not convey to me their
Totally.
understanding, you know? So, yeah.
Totally.
Did you say what you're working on?
Yeah, so I think, well, like, one thing too I was going to say, so I'm just uncomfortable with people being uncomfortable. So that's like a big problem I have. But I had an interaction with a friend recently who had an intern in her workplace. And she is not backwards about being forward. So she absolutely just had to really, like, be so incredibly tough with this person. They came to something completely unprepared, and she really had to sit down and just be like, that's absolutely unacceptable. And I was kind of like sweating and feeling so uncomfortable even hearing this story. But that is such a gift that she gave that person, because she could have just been like, great, and then written a terrible evaluation, or like had
Right.
this person fail whatever the module they were doing. And instead, early enough in the process, this person can now, like, change things and improve things. And, like, yeah, so that was something I really need to, like, see that and accept that as being something to be grateful for. And it's an important thing to do for the students.
I completely agree. And you know what
Yeah.
it reminds me of is the concept of like a weeder class where you're just weeding out the people that you aren't going to cut it, you know? As opposed to trying to cultivate cultivate's maybe the wrong word, but help everybody grow into
Yes.
somebody that can do that class or a class program, job interview, whatever it is. We're trying to teach everybody, and so we don't really. Yeah, so I've thought about this with the students in my class too, where it's like I pick the ones that I think would be good for research students, and then if they are good, then I help them do lots of good research, and I think that helps. But that helps, you know, on their career path and experiences and all that. But then I wonder, what about the ones that I decide aren't that good? Wouldn't it be nice if I could help them learn why I didn't think they were good so that they
Oh,
could then
yeah.
get better? And I didn't just like say, well, too bad, I don't really want to work with that person, you know? So it is a gift to help them. We just have to figure out how to effectively convey the actual helpful lesson.
Well, I think I'm just completely, like, a convert now, but
Ooh.
now I'm just like, this needs to be a part of the discussion from day one about feedback. What does feedback on exams mean? What does feedback on, like, lab reports mean? Do you know what I mean? And, like, I just think that's so crucial.
I love it.
And yeah,
And
I
seems-
think,
Go ahead.
well, I think I told you one time, I had a really great mentor at one point when I was at the University of Oregon, and she told me something which was, and you've sort of articulated this too with one of the quotes from the Four Agreements, I think, but it's sort of like, take everything that people are telling you kind of with a pinch of salt. Do you know what I mean? And criticism and praise alike. You know, but I think, I mean, that's like, but then I like this bit of, like, what do you agree with? Like, evaluating it, not just like, everything they said is true, I'm the worst person, or these people are just fools, I don't have to listen to anything they say. And I think that's, yeah, a super important part. But I think I don't think we talk about it enough.
I don't think we do. And wouldn't it be helpful for everybody and maybe more equitable to talk explicitly about what feedback means and how to use it? Because it's so easy for the reaction to be, oh, I hate feedback, I'm not even going to look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've felt that. So how not useful that is. So anyway, I like the idea of having more of a discussion about that.
Well, there's someone who has incredibly creative ideas about teaching, and he's just has so much stuff. So one of the things I struggle with online teaching is not knowing, like, I think a lot of students don't read the comments on feedback, you know what I mean, that they get.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he had an assignment that was actually before they could see the grade, I think. He would have them, they had to like type in something that was like, what do you think about this feedback? Or like, what was something you took away from what I said about your report?
Okay.
And they had to fill that in before they could see their grade or something along those lines. But yeah, I think and again, we created this system because we had this numerical system of evaluating people. So we're like, why do they only care about the number? But, you know, I think
it's true.
Yeah, but trying to motivate people to really look at those other things.
I like that. And so that's like an example where there's an assignment where they must do it. And I if I were doing that assignment, I would have a moment where I explain why there's that assignment, because the whole purpose of So anyway, I think it all is an example of how it'd be helpful to have an explicit conversation about how to use this constructive criticism that we're giving them.
Yeah. I love this. This is one of those episodes where I was like, I don't know, Claire, I don't really talk. And then now I'm like, I just want to go out and stop people on the street and be like, do you know something about feedback? So yes, thank you. This has been super illuminating. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.